Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to tune into our webinar today. And today we'll be talking about digital transformation in action. So I'm Jordan Guest from OpenCities, and today we'll be hearing about 3 guests from local councils in Australia and New Zealand who'll be telling their stories and providing some practical insights when it comes to digital transformation and their journeys. So just a quick note on the format for anyone who's just joined or people who have joined. So this will be a kind of one way in terms of a conversation with myself and our 3 special guests. I'll provide some contact details at the end for anyone who would like to ask any questions, request any further information or follow up. So just letting everyone know what the format of today will be. And without further ado, let's get stuck into it. So to set the context before we hear from our special guests, I'll just quickly talk about what residents or customers might expect when it comes to a good online experience, why it's important to deliver on that experience, and how we can get there. And then, of course, we'll be hearing from our 3 guest speakers on how they went about improving their digital services for residents in their communities. So first of all, just a bit about us, who we are, OpenCities. So we help local governments around the world in Australia, New Zealand and the US to serve better. So we work with close to 100 local government organisations in Australia, and whether it's through website, intranets or online forms, as we'll hear more about today, that's just a bit of a background of who we are and what we do. And we've been in the game for about 10 years. So that's just a bit about us before we get stuck into it. So first thing we want to talk about is what is a good online experience and what do residents expect when they log on to a website, or a local government website. And whether it's fair or not, residents will generally compare their online government experience to the industry-leading consumer-grade experiences that they get from anywhere else. So oftentimes, you'll hear a comparison that might be, why is it that I can book a multi-city around the world flight in 5 minutes on my phone from the couch, but if I want to register my dog, I need to download and print out a form, fill it out, and then visit council offices between 9 to 5. So people expect to be able to engage on a timeline that suits them and in a rather convenient and fast manner. So let's talk about why it's important to deliver a good digital experience and try to fulfill these expectations. And I think for the commercial entities and the companies that you see listed here, so Netflix and Amazon, maybe Uber and those other digital experiences or companies that people engage with, I mean, it seems pretty clear that the better experience that they offer, the more customers that they'll get, the more they'll be able to convert away from their competitors. So as a local government entity, the goals are a little bit different. As a single source provider, no one's going to go and register their dog with another council if they don't get a good experience. So there are 2 overarching reasons on why it's important to deliver on these expectations. And one is greater outcomes and of course a lower cost. So in terms of greater outcomes, a good online or good experience, customer experience with our local government leads to increased trust, which I'd say now more than ever is vital. To reduce risk, I mean, we all know that when we have a bad experience, we'll talk to our partner, our spouse, our family, our friends, and even sometimes take to social media. And of course, it's better for employee morale. I think people are going to be happier to go to work knowing that the organisation is delivering a good service and also not worrying about what they might hear and the feedback that they might get if a poor service is delivered. So another point is lowering costs. So the data you see here and these dollar figures are a cost to serve by channel. There's some numbers from a Deloitte report. And so these may not be hard science and exactly relevant to your organization, but I think that their ratio will be approximately the same. You can see that a face-to-face transaction is almost $17 with an online transaction being only 40 cents. So that's something to keep in mind when providing good online service as well. So we know what residents expect and what we're trying to deliver, and we know why we should strive. So let's talk about the how. So this is a study from McKinsey that analysed local government experiences with a number of residents and customers. And so what they wanted to do was determine what are the factors that led to a great customer experience and what was of high importance. And you can see that reliability and simplicity were the two top factors in determining a good and positive experience. So I think reliability almost goes without saying. Residents and customers expect that the service that they request will be delivered and available when they expect it to be. So simplicity is what we're going to focus on more today. And when I say simplicity, to give you a visualization of what I mean, when a resident logs on to a local council website, local government website, or walks into the office and sees the myriad of forms and options and services that are available to them, sometimes this is what they see. And there's a lot of information that's there, and a lot of useful information, but the onus is on them to kind of figure out what they need to do and find their own path. So we're trying to go from this to something like this. How do we cut out the clutter and the information that may not be relevant to someone who's trying to accomplish a specific task or request a specific service? So that's a bit of the background as to what we're going to be talking about today. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce the three guest speakers that we'll be hearing from today. So we'll be hearing from Donna Liddycote from Melton City Council in Victoria, who will talk about her journey and a bit of a background on some information on prioritising which services to put online first. We'll then be hearing from Joanna Cooney from Horowhenua District Council in New Zealand. We'll talk about her journey of moving payments online via forms and some of her thoughts and advice around how to get those forms up and running. And then we'll be hearing from Kirsty Thomas at Yarra Ranges Shire Council in Victoria, who'll be talking about going beyond the transactional nature of forms and looking at information as a service and using forms to guide people through a decision tree to help inform them of something that they might need to know. So first up, we're going to hear from Donna at Melton City Council. And to give you an idea of some of the results and they've achieved, so with over 100 digital forms currently online, the stormwater legal point of discharge form on its own has had over 45,000 submissions since being implemented and has brought in $700,000 or more than $700,000 in revenue, which is a great achievement. There's also another form, the casual venue hire form, which between the amount of time that staff would spend manually keying in or handling a transaction over the phone or over the counter has saved 1,300 working hours since it was implemented. So some great results there. So without further ado, hello, Donna, are you there?
Yes, hi, how are you?
Doing very well. So would you like to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about what you do at Council and some information on Melton City Council to give listeners an idea of what Melton City Council is about?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Donna Liddycote and I'm the Web Officer at Melton City Council. My role sits within the communications team at Melton, and apart from managing our website, a big part of my role is online forms. Our comms team here, it's a very busy little team consisting of 5 people.
Yep.
Melton is one of the fastest growing municipalities. I think we were the 3rd fastest growing in Victoria last year.
Yep.
And our population is around 165,000. So with the quick growth, our residents' expectations has also grown in that the expectation is that they will be able to do pretty much everything online.
Definitely. And a small team serving a large community that's only getting larger, right?
Yep. Definitely.
Great. So in terms of moving a lot of your services online and getting started on that journey, how did that come about and how did you get started?
We moved across to OpenCities website platform a couple of years ago. And at that time, we had an existing kindergarten application online form. Mm-hmm. But that kinder form back then had been created as a custom form. So Open Forms was very new when we moved across to OpenCities, and after talking to Alex, we decided to recreate this custom kinder form, which was quite a long form with payments, and we did that on the Open Forms platform.
So it was almost that you were forced to make a decision. You were moving over to a new platform, and so you had to decide where will this new form live. And so your journey, I guess, with Open Forms and getting some of these forms online was kind of forced, right? And so you said that you put the kindergarten form online. That was a big complex form with payments. And then you said as well when we were chatting that you had a couple of low-hanging fruits that you went for next, some simple forms that you started to put online. And so what happened next within the organisation?
Yeah, that's right. So after the success in creating the kinder form, we decided to select a few other high demand, low effort paper-based forms and create them as online forms. And that's kind of where we started. After several forms were successfully being digitised and teams were seeing tangible results, we suddenly became overwhelmed with the requests for form transformation. So then we had to stop and rethink how we could better handle the influx of requests and a way of prioritising which forms to focus on.
Definitely. So you had, I mean, already a small team who's got your hands full with the website, and then you've started to put a few forms online, and then all of a sudden, I remember when we were talking, you said you had an influx of requests that meant you had to start looking at 100 or 200 potential services or forms to go online. And so you touched on that you needed to figure out a way to prioritize what you're going to tackle first. So I'd be interested for you to share, how did you prioritize which forms to focus on?
Initially, we worked closely with our customer service team to try and establish the most suitable form candidates. So this included like looking at which forms by going online would lessen the workload for the customer service team in kind of manually processing payments, less people coming to the counter, and then less forms, paper forms coming in via mail. So after that, our approach was then to look at all the department forms. We then met with each team to try and figure out from their perspective which forms they felt should be prioritised as online forms. That was actually really a very informative process and enabled us to prioritise, I guess, our form building schedule. So ensuring the schedule was shared with fair representation from all the departments.
Great. So it sounds like you started with customer service first, which is how do we find out what the priority is from our residents and from our community? And then, of course, chatted to all of your internal stakeholders about what would be important for them, what would have the most impact for you as a team to help them. So it sounds like, this is an ongoing journey, and it's been a long journey. And so I'd like to know from you, at what point or multiple points along the way did you feel that you'd been successful in this process?
I think when our senior management and leadership team took notice and established a dedicated team to drive the digital transformation and online services.
I like that, because it sounds like you started this process almost as a necessity, and then after the success of the few forms that you did, everyone wanted to kind of have their services transformed and have some forms online as well. And so it wasn't something that had been set out with a solid plan. It just happened. And then when leadership turned around and go, hang on, we're seeing some great results here, and they start to put some structure around it and some dedicated resource. It's definitely great feedback, right?
And it was good that, that's when we felt that we were probably successful, because all of a sudden, senior management, it was like something has to happen here.
Yeah, definitely. And so in our conversations leading up to this webinar, and when you shared your story and your process with us, we had to think about it. And the questions that you were asking a lot of your internal stakeholders and customer service team, and a lot of the things that you were assessing and analysing fell in nicely with some existing kind of prioritization frameworks that are out there. And so what we did is we went ahead and, inspired by your approach, put together a service prioritization guide along with a worksheet that can be used to assess the various factors So you can see here, number one is reach. And like you said, you had a look at what are the volume of submissions and number of calls that we're getting on this topic, and how many people will be affected if we go ahead and transform this service and put it online. So being able to assess the reach and then the impact. You mentioned as well, certain forms required a payment, which is internal processing time, or they were complex and involved a lot of internal effort. So the more time that you're saving, the higher impact that form's going to have. So being able to rate that as well. And then of course, effort. So you said the low hanging fruits, the ones that were low effort, were great to prioritize first. So understanding how much effort's involved in creating a form or putting a service online. And then we added in another column as there, which is just another lens to look through as well, which is readiness. I mean, there are a lot of services which would be great to have online, but some of them rely on external stakeholders, different internal systems and bits and pieces, or may require further clarification or some assumptions to be questioned. So there's another lens in there for readiness to be able to apply that and see how ready you are to move forward with that. So these are some documents or artifacts that will be available to all of our listeners today. So I'll provide some contact details at the end about getting in touch to get a hold of those, and inspired by the work that Donna's done at Melton. So thanks for sharing, Donna. And I think that this, hopefully these worksheets and the guide will help some people achieve some similar results.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, just wanted to hear when we were talking and when I was talking to our other guests as well, I asked you to summarize your 3 top tips, and all of you had a lot more than 3. But for our listeners today, what are your 3 top tips?
I would say involve the customer service team early. And then I would say engage stakeholders and understand internal processes before you actually start. Then I would say be prepared for the wave.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, it sounds like you did a lot of internal research to understand what your residents' needs were by chatting to the customer service team, understanding internal processes to get an idea of what's that effort and impact for our teams. And then of course, having a framework and a structure to the hundreds of requests that you had come in the door.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Great. Well, thanks so much for sharing today, Donna.
No, thank you.
Great. And so now we're going to move on to our next special guest, who is Joanna Cooney from Horowhenua District Council. So before I invite Jo on, some of the great results they've seen is they've developed over 140 online forms, with an example of the property file request form having 90% online submissions over 4 months. So a huge channel shift and seeing less over the counter and over the phone queries, and a lot more residents self-serving online. And of course, over the time that digital transformation has been a focus for Jo and her team, seeing a year-on-year increase of services transacted online. So the dollars transacted online. So hello, Jo, are you there?
Hi, Jordan.
All right. So thank you for taking the time to chat to us all today. And would you mind introducing yourself and talking a bit about Horowhenua District Council, yourself and your team?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jo from Horowhenua District Council. Our district is on the west coast of the North Island, and we serve an estimated population of 35,000. Our staff members sit at around 220 plus and incorporate our libraries, community centres and aquatics. So we're a small council with an even smaller team, with myself and one other part-time website officer making up a 1.8 full-time equivalent. And we also sit in the comms team here as well.
Yep, so you've got comms, website, online forms, digital transformation. There's a lot for you to do, hey?
Yeah, that's right.
Great. So today we're going to be talking about how you put a few payment forms online and really simplified that process for residents and staff. So would you mind sharing a bit of why that was decided to get started?
So a number of our application and request forms include payments. So we thought, why not offer them online when digitising the form and make it easier for both our customers to pay for applications at the time and for us to match up and process the forms and payments when they come in.
So it was recognising that there was a lot of time that could be saved for residents and staff in terms of those online payments, and then putting forward a bit of an organised effort around getting those online.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So it sounds like you identified a need or a problem, and then you set out with a solution. So what were some of the hurdles and some of the challenges that you faced at the start?
What types of payments we wanted to offer? So do we want to offer poly payments, credit card, debit card, internet banking, also paying in person? On some of our forms, we offer that as well. Setting up the merchant banking accounts, working with our debtors team, talking to them about the new way of processing the payments because it was quite new for them. So what information did they need so that they can easily match payments to applications? So for example, is it helpful if they have a particular reference detail added to their email notifications?
Yep. So it sounds like there were a few kind of logistical challenges that needed to be figured out right from the start, and that included getting some services set up, your online banking, and also having a chat to the finance team or the debtors team about some potential changes to process and identifying what the current process is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you kind of go about overcoming these challenges?
We worked really closely with our finance team for the merchant banking setup, and we made a number of changes that the banks required to set those up, and testing and reiterating for online payments. We also did some staff training, well, not us, but the bank. Staff training for the DPS portal and the Poly portal that we had set up. And we set up a little bit further along, we set up a test Poly account as well, which has been great so that we can test the form from end to end. And then just working right across the organisation where we need to streamline the processes.
Yeah, so it sounded like you identified some challenges in terms of those logistic hurdles that you need to get over, but after that it was finding those the challenges that weren't so obvious through testing, of course, with residents and the form itself, but also testing your internal processes and your new kind of online transaction applications that you were using or working with your bank. So it sounds like there was a lot of kind of forethought, but also a lot of testing that allowed you to achieve some of the great results that you have.
Yeah, and it takes more time, but it's definitely worth it.
For sure. And so again, through this process, sounds like quite a long journey. So at what point or several points, when did you feel like you'd been successful in what you set out to do?
It was a win for us when we got our first online payment form live. Then another one with the first completed form that came through. So we always see it as a success to launch the form and then a joy to see the completed submissions come through. With our first online dog renewal form, I would literally jump into the system several times a day and track the amount of responses coming through and share those with people. In the bigger picture, we felt we were successful when we could see our response numbers increasing and also more requests coming through, like with Melton City Council, for more forms to be done.
So there you go. So there are a few, sometimes there's some KPIs that you're looking to hit, and when those numbers are reached is kind of when you're successful or not. But it sounds like there were kind of those small wins along the way of just getting the first form online, getting those first few submissions, and then of course seeing the return over the long term in terms of more dollars transacted online, more responses year on year online, and seeing some of those kind of numerical results. So really appreciate you sharing that with us today. And in our conversations in understanding your process and your approach from identifying the forms that needed to go online and then putting them online is you had a lot of questions that you asked and almost a checklist for each form that you put online. And so what we did is, inspired by those questions, is we sorted them into kind of 5 stages for putting a form online. So number 1 was research, and a lot of internal engagement, the actual build itself, testing, which you said was vital, very important, launch, and then iterate and improve, more testing and more improvement. So we're going to make this checklist again available to anyone who's listening today to set up their own form checklist to ensure they're getting consistent and high quality online services. And we're even going to include some of the questions that you were asking internally, so people have kind of a reference point and some examples to work with. So thanks for sharing that, Joe, and hopefully it will help some of our listeners today along their journey as well.
You're welcome.
So again, you told me you had a lot more than 3 top tips, but
Yeah, I did.
we're going through. What are your 3 top tips for people looking to achieve some similar results?
So number 1 would be inclusive of other teams, which has come up another, this theme comes up quite often as well. So for us, we think it can be a simple process, pulling an online form together sometimes, but it's always more seamless, not just for us, but for our customers if we work across the organisation and ensure that the right information is going to the right place.
Yep.
So secondly, build, test, reiterate and test again, then go live. We do a lot of testing, iterations where we need to test again and then we launch. If possible, if you can, have a polytest account so you can go end to end and see exactly what's going to happen and what's going to come through.
Yep.
As one example,
sorry. No, you continue.
So with our property file request form, we launched it, it went live, we thought great. And then it turns out there was a need for us to provide a receipt for some people that were requesting them, and they were doing that manually to start with.
Yep.
So we quickly edited the form, provided that functionality, talked to debtors, made sure all the right information was in there for them, and then we did a second version that went live. That's been really useful so far.
Definitely. I was just going to say, I think that a number of the payment gateway providers offer a test gateway as well. So that's something that's available regardless of what, or mostly available regardless of what payment gateway you use. So very important. I think we talk a lot about customer experience, testing with your residents, your community, your customers, whoever's going to be using the form or online service. It's also vital to test that internal process as well, which I think, you gave some great examples of. So,
yeah.
And what was your last tip?
My last, even though it was really hard, I have a before you begin section. So we think this is a really crucial step in letting our customers know upfront what they'll need to complete their form. So they might need their banking details if it's a payment-based form. They might need electronic copies of their documents.
Yep. So just let people know what they're in for and what they need up front, so that they don't get to a certain point in the form and realize that either they're in the wrong place or they don't have what they need. Nothing worse than that. So yeah, sometimes front loading that information is very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Jo, for your time today and sharing your story. And hopefully those listening will be able to apply some of your advice with their own implementations.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you. Okay. So up last but not least for sure, we'll be hearing from Kirsty Thomas at Yarra Ranges Shire Council. So to talk through some of the incredible results that Kirsty and her team have achieved. They have over 300 public-facing online forms at the moment. And for their building permit information form, which you can see over here and we'll be talking about, in the first 12 months, it received almost 13,000 visits. And with 2.5 minute average session time, I mean, you can do the maths on that. That's a lot of time saved with either over the counter or over the phone information sharing interactions with residents. And also, Yarra Ranges has managed to achieve a 94% average customer satisfaction score for online forms, which is absolutely unbelievable. So Kirsty, are you there?
Hi, Jordan. Hi, everyone.
Hello. So thanks for joining us today. Would you mind kicking off by introducing yourself and telling us a bit about yourself, your team, and Yarra Ranges Shire Council?
Sure. I'm a part of the digital team, previously with the comms team at Yarra Ranges. And we're an interface council in the outer east of Melbourne. We're a really large council of 2,500 square kilometres, so a really unique mix of urban and rural. So great opportunities for us with digital, given the distance that some of our community members have to travel to get to one of our offices.
Wow, so yeah, quite a diverse range of challenges that you face as a council. And
yeah,
large
definitely.
area to serve, a lot of incentive to have really good online services. And so the form that we showed before was kind of an information as a service form about helping people to identify if they need a building permit or not. And so what we'd love to know is how did you identify the need to have something like this online?
I think as we've had open forms for some time, and as we were working with teams and determining which forms we could digitise and so on, as part of our business improvement process, it became really clear that there was some areas of council where we were getting lots of calls from residents in the community about looking for advice, but not necessarily for a service that we provide. So although the community look to council for advice on building permits, we don't actually issue them. So we were receiving a lot of calls, for people asking, do I need a building permit for various things? So it just highlighted the need through customer experience and our business operations team that we could maybe use the tools within the system to help guide people through that journey without having to call.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is a couple of times from Joe and Donna, they both mentioned as well that when you're looking and trying to assess your community and resident and internal needs, I mean, sometimes your Google Analytics and some hard kind of digital or online data is very helpful, but also having a chat to the customer service team and getting a feel for what they think is a really kind of a priority. And also looking at some of the data external to web, see what's the volume of calls, what's the volume of over-the-counter transactions or conversations. And so you identified that there's a lot of time being spent talking to someone at council about whether someone needs a permit or not, either over the counter or over the phone. And so you identified this need, and then you thought we could use a form to guide people through this conversation, and they can put in information and figure out if they need a building permit or not. So what were some of the challenges of going from not having this online to having all of this information online?
I think early on in the piece, it was just mapping out the process and making sure that we had all the right people in the room, our building surveyors to provide their advice on the interpretation of the regulations and how we could use the logic in the system to help guide people to the right answer. So really getting their buy-in and their involvement in the process so that they had faith that, it was going to produce the right outcome for the customer. So getting the building team involved, our customer experience team and our business operations team all in the room together to really map out that process was key to making it a success.
Yeah, and then I think you mentioned as well that there was some internal concerns around, well, if someone answers these questions in the form and it gives them some advice, that there might be a challenge there. And so how did you kind of address that?
Yeah, I think along the way we've had that with a number of forms, concern that perhaps people would not put in the right information or so on. And I guess we just really reassured them that it was the same as talking to them over the phone. We take the information they provide in good faith, and at least we can use the tools in the system to direct them through the process. So by having them involved in the process from the beginning and working through that form with us and involved in the testing process, it was really beneficial. Yeah,
so because we've definitely heard a lot about getting that kind of positive input from all of the internal stakeholders, but also having to address any of the concerns and risks along the way as well. So I think that's a great example of taking on board some of that risk and working with it to ensure that you can bring them along on this journey too. And so it was we saw some of the great results for the form and providing information through that guided journey. So how have you kind of taken this concept and applied it further?
We're now looking at, we've applied a similar approach internally with some of our forms and our intranet, and also extending that to our public website. A more recent one is our organisation has just endorsed a project management framework, and we're now using a similar approach to help our staff determine, what type of project category they may be, and then using it to direct them to the right templates and guides and so on to help them through that process. And we're also extending it to other applications and appeals processes. So with a few questions and providing that information up front, helping our customers understand whether they're likely to be eligible to proceed with a particular application or appeal, or whether we can provide them with information that may stop them from applying unnecessarily and wasting both their time and in some cases money, but also reducing the administration from our side as well.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like very, when we first discussed this form, when we heard about it, we were here at OpenCities, I mean, we were also really impressed with the novel kind of use and application. And so, yeah, it's really a fantastic approach. And it sounds like it's not just applicable in one specific circumstance. I mean, you're using it to help guide people through internal decision making and using that project management framework, like you said, and understanding how to apply it. So hats off to you for sure. And I'll ask you the same question I've asked our other two guests. I mean, there's a long journey, and I mean, you're still on it. There's still a lot to go. But at what point or multiple points did you feel that, you know, what you'd done had been a success?
I think with this this particular form, we could see the traffic and increased interest in the use of the form and so on. And it was really, you know, people were using it almost instantly. And the great thing is seeing people use it at night when they're not able to contact our team and so on. I think that's when, for me, you see the success in these things, that you're allowing people to, you know, serve themselves in their own time in the way that they choose, which they couldn't previously do before.
Yeah, definitely. Because if they wanted to find the information online, generally it's going to be a huge kind of policy document that's going to be very difficult for them to interpret. And so the only way that they can realistically navigate that is with help from council, and that of course has to be during business hours. So providing the flexibility for them to kind of go on that journey and self-evaluate outside of that time, I mean, makes it a lot more convenient for them, and of course saves the organisation time as well. So that's really great. And I think when we were chatting as well, I did put together a checklist and form prioritization spreadsheet for Joe and Donna's cases respectively. But in chatting to you, you said that form prioritization or service prioritization spreadsheet would be equally as helpful and equally as applicable when identifying any kind of information giving services that you might want to put online. So we'll recommend that if anyone does request any of those artifacts or the worksheet, that you can also use that to prioritize, well, what kind of information are people asking for a lot? And if we're going to make that a self-evaluation kind of form online, where do we start? You can use that spreadsheet to the same effect. So again, I'll ask you the same. Oh, great. Sorry. So again, I'll ask you the same question. You had a lot of tips, but what are your 3 top tips for our listeners today?
Yeah, quite similar to the others, I think. But I think the first one would be really uncovering that customer need and understanding what the possibilities are. Maybe thinking outside of the box a little bit to how you can solve those customer needs in different ways. And I think the building permit form was a good example of that. It, you know, is something that it's not traditional. It's not a transaction that council is responsible for as such, but you know, we identified that it was an area that we could improve, so we used the forms to do that. So yeah, really understanding what the customer wants and getting the data from both your customer experience team and your analytics to inform that.
Great.
The second one would be to put the resident first, especially with some of our more complex areas. Really putting yourself in the community or your residents' shoes and looking at it from their perspective, not knowing the process, not understanding the jargon, and really making it simple and easy for them. And we're really quite lucky here that we have a commitment from our teams that, you know, we do put the customer first. So sometimes that might mean it's not always as efficient for us in some ways, but we make sure it's as efficient and as simple as possible for the customer.
Yeah, and I think that you can quickly see why you have that 94% positive customer satisfaction result on your online interactions for sure. And yeah, your third and final tip.
Evaluate and iterate. So again, similar to Jonah before, you know, really that once you've got that form finished, that's not the end of it. Once your content finished, that's not the end of it. To continually go back and review and look at the feedback that you're getting through those feedback channels to see how you can make it better and just continue to improve.
Yeah, definitely. I know I say the word journey a lot, and I do feel a bit weird saying it sometimes, but I feel like there's no other way to explain it. It's not a fixed project or something that's a single point in time. It's something that's really just ongoing and it never ends, and there's always room to improve and make that experience better.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Kirsty.
Thank you.
All right. right, so I think we're running a little bit over time, but I hope that everyone has gathered some useful and practical insights today. And to recap on what we heard about. So first we heard from Donna at Melton City Council on how she prioritised services and forms when it comes to digital transformation. We heard from Joe at Horowhenua District Council talking about how she ensured consistent and high quality online experiences with a fairly straightforward checklist. So I think that would be very helpful. And then we heard from Kirsty, so beyond transactions, how can we provide more online? And information as a service is a great example. Instead of putting the onus on residents to read through large amounts of information and figure it out for themselves, how do we make that journey as easy as possible? And just like the remote control we saw at the start, how do we just give them the information that's vital to them to take the next step? And so thank you, everybody. I couldn't get through this presentation without at least one cheesy animation, so I popped the bounce animation in there. So I've been Jordan Guest from OpenCities, and if you'd like to get in touch to either discuss any of these topics further, if you'd like me to connect you with any of our guest speakers today, or you're interested in any of the artifacts like the prioritization guide and worksheet or the checklist template, if you're interested in using those, feel free to shoot me an email, give me a call, or you can go to our website as well to learn more and contact us through there. So thank you everyone so much for your time, and thank you especially to our 3 guest speakers. And I hope to speak to you soon or see you at the next webinar. Thank you, everybody.